Welcome to eHealth Learning, inspiring professionals worldwide.
Good. So a really warm welcome to everybody, and particularly to Liz Kalinowska and Dushka Hutton, who've written this wonderful book, Everybody Tells a Story, which is quite unusual in the sense that it's telling the story of the experience of craniosacral therapy from the client's point of view. And I've really enjoyed it, actually, and it's full of a lot of very rich material, which we're going to talk about hopefully this evening. So those of you who know both Liz and Dushka will know that Liz has been doing craniosacral therapy for about 25 years or so, and has also taught it in London at various schools, and works closely with Dushka, who's also an Alexander teacher and craniosacral therapist. So I'd like to pass over to you two, if that's all right, and I'll be here asking some questions and fielding questions from everybody here. So please do, this is an interactive book launch, and you can ask questions in the chat room there whenever you want, and I will then put them to Dushka and Liz. So over to you, thank you.
Hello. Just to say before we start that I can't reach my keyboard, so I'm not going to be able to answer questions, so I'm going to rely on John to read them out. We thought that we'd start with a short reading from the book, and then I think John's going to ask us some questions, and then we'll obviously love to hear from anybody who's listening if they have any questions. So, in the beginning, we come to know ourselves through our sensory perceptions of life, how the world affects us and how we move within it. Our bodies are a map of our histories, the narrative of our lives. They record the ways in which we were brought up. They chronicle our accidents and illnesses, our emotional experiences and our beliefs. They reflect the stories we tell ourselves and the stories others tell about us. The course of treatment from a bodywork therapist can affect us in unexpected ways. What starts as a visit for a sore shoulder or a tendency to headaches could become a journey into the heart of our emotional life and perhaps the depths of early experience. While the so-called mind-body connection is a familiar concept among therapists, it's not necessarily so obvious to the general public. One of our aims in writing this book is to highlight this vital connection and to show how it might manifest within the therapeutic context. Following the journey of a fictional client and therapist, we show a relationship evolving and developing in real time, how the participants in the situation transform and grow through their interaction, and how each of them contributes to the process. We've included our own experience of writing this book because, as it took shape, we found that it became yet another meaningful thread in our story. Our intention is to demonstrate the magical quality of craniosacral therapy, an experience unlike any other, but not one that can be easily described in words. If asked for our explanation, we would answer that most of our work is incredibly simple. We listen and offer rest and resourcing. It can often be mundane. We don't offer to cure or to heal or to see into the future or the past, but we do put our hands on people, and something happens when we do. So that's a little section from the beginning of our book, our introduction, and we then go on to discuss the journey of two women. One, Anna, who's a client who comes in for a series of treatments, and her therapist, Sarah.
Just to make clear that they are both fictional people. They're not real people. They're an amalgamation of various people that we've come across.
So, John, have you got any questions?
Yeah, I've got some questions for you. So, as I say, it's an unusual book in the sense of the way that it's written. It's not just describing the technique of craniosacral therapy, like a lot of other books do in a way. And so you've chosen to, look at it from the therapist's point of view and also the client's point of view. And I'm just wondering why you chose to do it this way. What drew you to do it that way?
Well, we start out deciding to do it that way. It kind of evolved as we went along. But as we wrote, we realized that we wanted to put our words into a format that could be accessed by not just by craniosacral therapists, but by other body workers and by clients, potential clients who wanted to know what craniosacral therapy was about and how it works. And so we gradually devised this format with these two fictional characters who are going through a course of treatments together. And the format actually gave us the freedom to explore things from both sides of the table, what's going on for the client and what's going on for the practitioner. And then we finally comment on it from our own perspective. At the end of each chapter, we give a commentary on what we feel was going on, our own experience of such situations, etc., etc.
Yeah. So I mean, we very much come to the conclusion that our work is a joint practice, and as Liz says, that's exactly what we show, and that the intentions of the therapist seem to have a huge impact on the client. And we in some cases sort of we have imagined a situation where the life story of the therapist actually resonates with the life story of the client, and what happens for us as therapists when that takes place. I'm sure it's an experience that we've all had. So we wanted to try to explain what it feels like to be a therapist and what that same experience feels like to be a client.
Mm. And to highlight the ups and downs that people go through. I mean, it's not just something that goes smoothly all the time. As therapists, we do have tremendous ups and downs and questions and times when we feel really insecure.
Oh, we've gone blank.
Yeah, we've gone blank.
Hello.
No, you're fine. I can see you. You're fine.
Well, we can't see anything now. The screen has gone blank, so forgive me.
You're fine. You got a little bit dark, but otherwise you're fine. That's better. But we have lost your sound. I think you just clicked on the microphone, so if you just unclick it or click it again, that's it. Yeah, that's it. You're on now.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.
So can I ask you, it's interesting that also you chose two female clients rather than maybe one male, one female. Can you say a bit about that?
Well, I suppose one of the where we came from was saying that actually most craniosacral therapists, and I think I'm right in saying, and probably most of our clients are women. And I think we call this, we've discussed this as being a female, very feminine way of healing, but we do obviously want to make sure that everyone's clear that we're not talking about gender specific, because we all know wonderful male healers. But I suppose it was to slightly redress the balance, and we made that decision early on, and then stuck with it. I don't know.
Yes.
Have you anything
I mean,
to
I don't think we ever considered doing it a different way.
No.
It just, again, it grew organically. And these two women appeared suddenly, and we wrote about them.
No, it's very interesting, and I think also it's very useful for clients to see it from the practitioner's point of view. Especially, I suppose a lot of clients tend to think of us as being always very healthy and always very together and not having our own issues, but it's quite very refreshing to be open about that, I think.
Well, we've been doing workshops. I mean, I've been doing workshops for years, and recently we've been doing workshops together. And when people come along to a workshop, we find that they have got all those insecurities and all those worries about their practice, and you know, if they can bring them out in that workshop environment, they find a lot of help there, and they find it very helpful to know that the other people in the room are feeling the same as them. So we thought we wanted to bring that into the book as well, so that it's reassuring. It's reassuring.
And you talked,
Yes.
sorry, you talked a bit
Sorry,
about
John.
supervision in the book as well, which I thought was very good. And you know, I mean, I've been doing supervision for 10 years now, and I don't really know how I survive without it, to be honest. And I think it's something that is really, really valuable. But I also noticed you said it was quite challenging at times, the issues you were bringing to supervision. Can you say a bit about that?
I think it is challenging because we have to start looking at why we're therapists, what our intentions towards our clients are, and essentially what our core beliefs are. And I think it's examining those things within us in a supervisory context that I found absolutely invaluable. And I agree with you. I don't go nearly enough to supervision, but when I do, I'm always I wonder how I could have coped without it. Actually, we all have clients that we don't know how to connect with, or I do. I don't suppose I'm unique. And it's very useful, I find, to discuss it with someone, and they can bring a completely different perspective onto a situation. And often I feel much happier afterwards, actually. I don't know, what's your experience? Because you are a supervisor
I'm
as well.
I'm a supervisor, and I find actually that supervision isn't completely understood in the craniosacral therapy world yet. I find that people come along for their 8 sessions of supervision that they have to have to be on in the membership, and I think it's really surprising for them to realise that actually they can have supervision for the rest of their career, and it will be really useful to them. I do feel that there's a certain amount of lack of understanding and lack of putting that across to people.
Yes,
And
I
I
agree, absolutely.
Yeah, this has come up a lot in writing this book, and as Liz was saying, we've since talking to therapists, we've realised that a lot of people are having the same issues, noticing the same issues, and that simply discussing it within a group can be so helpful for all of us.
Yeah.
And in fact, it is a form of supervision or group supervision, if that can take place in a workshop.
Yeah. No, it's great. I really liked in the book how you also described certain sessions which were, I wouldn't say mundane, but, but you know, and then other ones which were really very intense, you know. And I'm just wondering how, because I know from my own practice, you know, you can get. I mean, I saw, I don't know, 7 people today, and some of those were very intense sessions, and others were more, you know, calmer, you could say. I'm just wondering how, I suppose, you both deal with that, the sort of level of intensity that can come up in craniosacral work. So how you deal with it? It's one of my interests.
Well, I think it's always a balancing act, isn't it? I can see that Dana has written at in my screen that if a therapist is depressed or feel down, should he or she work, and can this be an influence on the client? I think it's part of the same question. I come from an Alexander technique background, so so much of the Alexander technique work is about staying back. And for me, it's completely invaluable. And it's very, very simple, being in my back right now. And I think that's one of the most helpful things that I've learned, is to really be grounded and stay back. But it's incredibly difficult. And again, that's why we wrote in the book, we have chapters where the therapist does feel slightly out of her depth, and that's when she goes to supervision. But I do feel out of my depth sometimes, and I can, particularly with people who are very, very traumatized, I can think of several instances where I felt that I was out of my depth. And talking about it with peers and with my supervisor has actually helped me to see that, in fact, there wasn't anything else I could have done. I don't know your experience of
well, I'm looking at Dana's question, and I'm thinking about whether a therapist should work or not. And my feeling is that sometimes when you are depressed or down, you might be bringing something that particular client actually needs. I mean, I think we give an example in the book of where something comes in that feels as if it might be inappropriate, but actually it was the very thing that needed to happen. So, I mean, I'm not saying that if you're ill or really, feeling very, very under the weather that you should be working, but on the other hand, you may be bringing something particular to that session that actually is very valid.
In fact, I've just found a passage in the book where we write about exactly this situation. I'm not sure if it would be helpful to read it. It's only a paragraph, so I will read it. So this is when the client and the therapist have had a difficult session. And part of our book is Liz and I commenting on the chapter that's just gone. So my comment was that in my own life and practice, I recently had a similar experience, and yet another uncanny example of life echoing the writing of this book. I had been facing a very difficult family situation and had been extremely upset. My own past has been rearing its head, and many very old wounds have risen to the surface, demanding to be heard yet again. In the midst of all this, I had a session booked in with a long-standing client. I had thought about cancelling the session, as I really didn't think that I could put aside my own feelings to be able to work professionally. In the end, I didn't, and the session went ahead. I wasn't really focusing on my client because I was being continually hijacked by my own swirling emotions. As I was writing, reading, or editing only yesterday, the only thing I managed to do was to concentrate on the sensations in my body and stop trying to change them. So I just allowed the feeling of being punched in the solar plexus, the crushing in the chest, and the constriction of my throat to be present. I wasn't able to stop my head from taking over and saying all the things I wanted to say, and eventually I had to give up and allow that as well. I remember saying to myself that this sensation is part of life too, and that amongst all these intensely painful feelings raging around my body, I could still feel my feet on the floor and the stability and uprightness of my spine. At the end of the session, my client sat up and said that it had been an extraordinarily profound session for her. She had had an experience of what she described as allowance, when she accepted that she wasn't perfect, and her experience of her body wasn't constant. She too stopped trying to prevent her thoughts and just accepted herself for what she was at that moment. And that is that is a true experience, and that's part of why we wrote this book, to try to give that experience that I'm sure we've all had as therapists. So I'm hoping that answers Dana's question.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. Really helpful.
As saying, do you tell the client at that moment in time that you want to bring this up with your
supervisor?
Yes. I would say that no, I don't think you tell the client at that moment in time.
I think in craniosacral therapy, it's such a I think I would depends which client I was working with. I have several clients who are psychotherapists. In that instance, I might well say I'm going to bring this up with my supervisor.
Oh,
But
okay.
having said
Yeah.
that, I
Yeah.
haven't yet done that.
Okay. No, I was coming from a place of, are you going to tell your client you feel terribly depressed today?
Oh, I see.
You
No,
know?
I wouldn't do that. I
No,
wouldn't do that.
No, no, no.
Okay.
Just
Can you-
my wrist. Yeah.
Could you say something about, you know, some therapists talk about how important it is to dialogue with a client during a session, or others have the feeling it's better to be quiet. Could you talk a little bit about what your feelings about that?
Well, I think in the book we describe dialoguing a fair amount with the client, but I think there are some clients that it really depends on the client, on the relationship you have with the client. With some clients, I'm very silent all the way through. With some clients, I talk a lot and ask them what they're feeling as we go through, and they ask me what I'm feeling, and we discuss things. So it really depends on the situation. It might be different from session to session with the same client. Some days they might want to be quiet, other times they might want to talk. I wouldn't purposely dialogue with somebody if it felt as if they weren't ready for it or they weren't going to be responsive to it.
Yeah, and I think I have exactly the same experience. Some people really want to come and they're almost sort of conk out from the moment they lie down. Whereas other people, particularly if they're very traumatized, don't necessarily find the body a very safe place. And so a sort of constant chat, I will do like a body map, or start off perhaps just rearranging them gently on the table, rather like saying hello before you meet somebody. You wouldn't necessarily launch into a very intimate conversation. You might just let things gently settle down for a minute. And so I might invite them to experience their body on the table, and then just very gently taking it like that. So
well, it's whatever comes up. You know, there's no compulsion to dialogue, and there's no compulsion to keep quiet. It's just in the moment what happens.
Could you, I mean, how do you think your approach to craniosacral work has changed since you wrote this book, or as a result of writing the book, would you say?
Well, I mean, since Dashka and I have been working together and writing the book, I think because we agree on so many things and we come to the same conclusions about so many things, I feel as if I've got much more confidence in the work that I do, having written the book. I feel much more free to just listen. And I think that's a process that we all go through as we carry on working. At the beginning, we are thinking about all the things that we've learnt while we've been training. And then gradually, I think you become more relaxed and more able to just let go and feel what you feel, and not necessarily be looking for the things that you feel you ought to be looking for. And I find that as I go through over the years, I've been more and more able to do that, just be, to not particularly be looking for one thing or another, or to fix things or to find things. So I think my attitude towards the work has just grown, and it feels, much more open and inclusive.
I think I'd say exactly the same. That I feel much more confident as a practitioner, much less worried about the outcome, and that able to take each session as it evolves. Because again, as therapists, we all know that you can see the same client many different times, and each session will be unique and a part of itself. And again, I suppose that was why we took 10 sessions with the same client, to just illustrate how very different each session can be. And I'm sure we've all had that experience. Some people can come and you can have an amazing session, and the next week will be really dull. And they can be disappointed. And I've now become less disappointed in that, and not expecting to all the bells and whistles.
And I've also learnt from Dashka some new ways of working, perhaps coming from Alexander, which has been very useful. And so I'm incorporating different little bits and pieces here and there. And I think you've probably...
I would say exactly the same, yes.
So we're learning from each other, and because we work together, we actually do double treatments, hands-on double treatments together. We're learning from that all the time, and you know, it's really interesting that Dashka is always having quite a lot of images coming up and visions, and I find when I work with her that that transmits to me more. So I'm finding my work is bringing up more image these days than it was.
Lovely. Must be very supportive, actually, to have that work, you know, working together like that. It's wonderful.
Oh, it's wonderful. It really is, and the clients just love it. Absolutely love it.
I can see that someone's saying
So
Alexander. I'm an Alexander technique teacher as well as a craniosacral therapist.
Yes.
So they're both body work, obviously. So if Andrea wants to know a bit more, Kirsten.
Yeah.
So if you want to know more, please do type in. Yeah. But no, it's been a really interesting journey. This. And of course, it's being able to discuss. It's like having a ready-made supervisor. Well, you are a supervisor, so it's very useful discussing clients together, and it's also useful because we do present these workshops together for any bodywork therapist, really, because they're all we all have the same problems, and I think that in the psychotherapeutic world, they talk about transference and counter-transference and boundaries. And I think that we don't do it nearly enough in the bodywork world, actually, because...
and particularly, so, I mean, we have touch. We touch people. So it's so much more important, really, for us to be aware of those issues. You know, how touch can stimulate so many things. And so we really need to know this stuff.
Yeah.
I can see that Andrea has asked how we started the characters of the book, and did we map a person with certain traits, or was it a story? Well, we knew that we wanted to write a book, and to begin with, it was very much a sort of one woman's journey, I think, was the original title, and it was a feminine.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it came to us that we needed to that we suddenly realised that we wanted to do 10 sessions of craniosacral therapy with the same people. And so, yes, we did sort of map the characters, but they did change a bit as we went along.
They developed a life of their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. They came and told us stuff instead of us writing them.
Yeah.
They actually sort of wrote themselves some of the time.
But I mean, the thing is that bits of them are bits of us, they're bits of our clients, so it all evolved quite organically. Even though looking back on my notes for the book, I can see that all the main themes that we actually explored were there right from the start. And I think the book took about 2 years.
2 years.
From start to finish.
Yeah.
So, yes, no, that was...
You mentioned a bit about touch, Liz, and of course, you know, craniosacral therapy is incredibly, although the touch is very light, you know, the contact is incredibly intimate, isn't it, and deep.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? How you hold that in your practice?
Yes. I mean, touch can evoke so much. But you know, it really depends for most people on their experience of touch, how they've been touched in the past, what touch, you know, how touch has been for them, whether touch has been difficult for them, whether touch is a good thing for them. And so I think you just need to be incredibly careful when you're touching people. You just need to really have their permission, and you have to keep negotiating that permission to touch, because things can change throughout a session. You may be touching at the beginning of the session, and that's okay, but as you work through things, things come up, and that touch may not be as appropriate further on. So I think that's something you either verbally negotiate, or you keep tuning into yourself and finding out whether it's still okay, whether you've drifted off on some sort of plane that you're just there with your hands on and you're not really paying attention. So yeah, this is how we deal with it very, very carefully.
And I think also, again, we keep talking about our workshops, but we're finding them so useful for just learning ourselves and for working with our fellows, in that we were running something the other day where we were looking at the difference in perceptions of touch if we really thought about letting go of the problems or whatever it is that have brought us into therapy. And then we looked again at how things changed if we allowed, instead of letting go, if we allowed acceptance. So it's very clear that the intention behind the touch is so important. And as Liz said, I think as therapists it's vital that we're constantly checking on this relationship, renegotiating.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to this question I think you asked about whether we talk throughout a session. Every session's different, and I mean, it's too obvious to say that someone who's been abused might find touch very difficult, but again, it's a constant dialogue. So that's what we're doing.
And touch can be misinterpreted, can't it? I mean, there are, we talk in the book about how somebody who you might have a very gentle butterfly touch on somebody, which they might find really invasive. They might feel really threatened by it, so they might want a slightly stronger touch.
Yeah. Yes. And I really like the fact that you say a lot of this work, or a lot of the principles you talk about in this book, can be applied to any kind of therapy, can't they? Because how people, as you say, how people receive touch can be incredibly intimate. Sometimes I feel like with this work there are so many layers to it, and sometimes you can feel like you're almost touching someone's soul, and it can be very, very deep, or it can be more sort of not exactly mechanical, but if someone comes in, with a slip disc or something like that, it can be reasonably kind of mundane, and the depths are huge. Yes. So you mentioned about this. I was intrigued when you said that the title was going to be was it a feminine approach to?
I think it was originally called One Woman's Journey or One Woman's Story, something like that. Yeah.
You talk about a feminine approach. What do you mean by that, actually? Because obviously I'm a man, so I'm intrigued.
Well, no, but as I think I said, I don't know, 10 minutes ago or something, we really want to emphasise that we're not talking about women only. This is very much not gender specific. I think we talk particularly in the introduction, about the difference between healing and curing. I think this was something that Liz brought up. Well, I don't know if you want to go through that.
Well, I mean, I just have the feeling that there is a very strong difference between healing and curing. So curing, I feel, is a very is having something done to you, and there is little participation. It's being cured. Somebody comes along a doctor or somebody and gives you a tablet and it cures you. Whereas what we're talking about with healing is that it involves both people. There's a participation from both people. Both participants engage with the whole process. And that's what we call the feminine way of healing. It's an engagement, it's an intuitive way of working. It's nuanced. It's just what we know as craniosacral therapy, really.
Yes, so I suppose, I mean, traditionally, feminine qualities you would say would be nurturing, listening, supporting. And as Liz saying, it's approaching our clients not with having a view about what they need, but simply being able to receive and listen. I found Mike Boxall's workshops very useful for helping me to understand that in a very particular way. But I think this is very true of craniosacral therapists. So it's absolutely not gender-based.
No, it's not. No. It's not imposed.
The term craniosacral.
That's what we.
No.
That's what we, yeah.
Yeah. I've often thought that the term craniosacral therapy is not a particularly good description of what we do.
No.
I'm wondering if you've thought of coming up with a better name.
Joint practice is quite good,
Yes.
I think. Yeah, that's what we call what we do, joint, because we're both involved, and so is the client. So we're all working together. But that's our name, so we're not going to give it to craniosacral therapy just yet.
I don't know. I do actually think it's not a very good name, but maybe we should call it CST or something.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
yeah.
What do you think?
I've been thinking about this for a long time and I haven't come up with anything. But no, I mean anything. It mirrors what you're saying. Anything that's feminine enough, that is. And craniosacral therapy does not sound particularly feminine.
No, it sounds quite mechanical, doesn't it? Really. Yeah.
Obviously, can you tell me a bit about the images you use? I think they're lovely, and each chapter has a little different ones on it, doesn't it? Like this. Can you?
So you can see that
Where do you get those images?
they're all in the picture behind us. All of them.
Ah. And where is that from?
Well, I'm going to pass it to Liz because the imagery was a very good friend of hers.
It's a good friend of mine did the images for us, and what it's showing really, that if you look at each chapter, you'll see that each image at the beginning of each chapter is a breakdown of the full figure there. So it's being taken apart and put back together again. So if you look at the ones above my head, you'll see that they're all sort of rather.
They're all the elements
the
just
elements,
twisted
yes,
around.
just
and broken.
twisted and rearranged. Yeah,
Exactly.
so exactly, yeah. That actually is
Yeah.
the picture that you see.
And then I've got the photograph here, the last one.
Yeah.
So our last, I don't know if anyone can see that. So that this is the image for the last chapter of the book, which is coming together. So all the bits are back in place.
Back in
now.
place. Yeah. Oh, Jerry says Larry Vigon is brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you, Larry. Yes,
Yes.
he was brilliant. How did you do? Sister of Love. I can't remember that its name. So
We've got another little reading. I don't know unless John's got some more questions.
Sorry, I had my microphone off. It was about how you find working together. You talked about joint practice. I'm just wondering how that works in practice. Do you share clients, for example? I know you do four-handed stuff, but how does it work in practice?
What the four-handed? Well, what?
No, I mean working just you two working together under joint practice. How does that work?
Oh, I see. Well, what joint practice really is an umbrella. I'm not sure if we're joint practice or Hatton Kalinowska actually, but we seem to be a bit of both. Basically, we have clients that we do four-handed treatments with. We run workshops together, and we're also considering writing another book together. It seems, well, I think it's a very successful partnership because we have different strengths and weaknesses. And I know for sure I wouldn't have written that book on my own.
No, well,
And
no, I can say exactly the same.
and it's a really nice way to work. So we under that umbrella we're planning to do all of those things. Perhaps run events where we invite speakers, or and certainly, as I say, running these workshops.
A friend of mine is a writer, and she said to me many times, "You're so lucky to have somebody to write with and do things with, because I feel so lonely when I'm doing it on my own." And that's absolutely true, because everything that we do, we can bounce off each other, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And the same thing with practice. A lot of therapists feel very alone, don't they, in their practice?
Yeah, exactly.
Did you want to read something, Dashka? Was it?
No.
You've got another message for us.
Okay. The need or compulsion to heal others can mean that we are looking for results, and that our objectivity can be compromised. Giving someone enough space to contact their own healing ability is difficult if we are operating from a place of performance anxiety or ego-driven need to succeed. Each person heals differently and in their own time. Meeting someone else's agenda sets up a situation where true healing may be exchanged for a suppression, rather like that which occurs with medication, since both client and practitioner are trying to please the other and the inner voices are not being heard. It is only by acknowledging our wounds that we can begin to move to a position where we are not unconsciously reacting to their legacies. To suddenly realize that one has the power to change a previously intractable situation can be an exhilarating thought, particularly for someone who has always felt helpless. Even if recognition comes in hindsight, it can still introduce a new reading of the dynamics of the situation, a new relationship with the past. We can't change the past, but we can, through conscious awareness, start to come to terms with it and begin to recognize its impact on our life.
That's lovely. Fantastic. And that is true of any therapy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean.
In your sorry.
Carry on.
Yeah. Yes, it's slightly changing the topic. In your book, you talk about how Roland Becker used to put in his notes sometimes "sh" something happens, and which I really really like, and also how I think you also in another bit you mentioned about clients going to sleep, and also when practitioners enter a kind of not exactly a dream state, but I know I do myself, when you seem to go into, things become, I suppose, not so clear in the sense that of what is actually happening on the table for people. That's what I'm saying. And I really like the way you write about that. And sometimes that feels quite mysterious. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because it seems fairly unique to craniosacral work.
Well, I think that's that's part of why we spoke up in 10 chapters, because in one of our chapters we show how what appears to be a tiny ache or something like that actually goes back into very early memory. And our client, Anna, is lying on the table and suddenly transported back to a situation that she had when she was frightened as a child. But again, I think we all know that feeling from craniosacral therapy, this extraordinary dream work. Like dream work is you can be almost asleep, but you can hear every noise outside or everything. But I don't know of any other therapy that is quite so mysterious and silent, and yet works on such a profound level. And it's really what made me want to train.
And I think that's true not just for the client, but for the practitioner too.
Yes.
So I think you both are able to access a very mysterious place. And I think why I think that Roland Becker quote is so great is because that's what it is. Something happened. You can't always describe it, or you can almost never describe it, I think. You know, it just is, it just happens. It's just, and when people ask you what happened there, this is going back to what has changed since we've written this book. I think I feel so much more confident in being able to say to people, I actually don't know what happened there. I have no idea. Something happened, but I really don't know what it was. But the mystery is wonderful, and I think that's what happens as you go on and on with your practice. You're more and more able to be in that unknowing place, that untravelled place, and feel comfortable in it, and not scared, and not worried that you're doing something wrong, or getting the whole thing wrong.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think, I know it's extraordinary. I mean, I had a session the other day with someone, and they were quite disembodied, and I suddenly had the impression that they were coming into their body like a hand coming through a glove, entering. But how do you write that on case notes? So perhaps somebody could do a seminar on case notes, please. Because I'm not sure that would be very useful to write down.
Yes. No, that's wonderful. Thank you. So I'm just wondering if we've got any other questions at all from anybody about the book or anything related to it.
Yes, I was just going to say I agree with Julian, who's written not ego or knowing it all as a practitioner. And I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
That's exact. But I think you need confidence to be able to
not know.
Yeah.
Which can be quite difficult, can't it? When you have someone who, I hate to say it, but it is often men who kind of want to be quite analytical, and you can feel all kinds of changes have gone on, but they're actually very difficult to put into words because they're on so many different levels. And I find that personally a little bit challenging sometimes.
I think so, but I guess, sometimes people do want that reassurance, and that's okay too. Then maybe I wouldn't be the right practitioner for them. And I can see that Andrea's written, do we have treatments ourselves? Yes, and actually we sometimes give each other treatments. So yes, I think, and I teach at an Alexander Technique school to train future teachers, so I'm constantly working with people and how to touch, how to put hands on, and all of that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. This is, I think it's a really, really useful book, this, and I would encourage everyone to get a copy and also share, with clients and everything. There is a link up here. I'll just put the direct link again, and so that we know where to get this at a discount. Here is the link here. Oops, sorry.
And I think in 4 weeks. Yes.
For 4 weeks, and the discount code is ETS, isn't it? I think.
I think it is. It's on an email, and I haven't got that up now because I'm looking at you, John. So, yes. Yes, I think it is.
So, any other questions before we stop?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the correct discount code. 15% you get off it.
So, thank
Anything
you.
else you want to say, both of you?
Andrea, I'm not sure if it's Andrea or Andrea, but thank you, and I hope you enjoy it if you buy it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. And so our next webinar is next Tuesday, and that is on an introduction to meta health, which should be very interesting.